that should be what you really ultimately want to be, is the authentic Luciferian rebel against this hypocritical Garden of Eden fakery that is this Zeusian construct of Apollonian behavior modification demands, right? It's so disgustingly formulaic and manipulative, but well done. You can see it, you can feel it. That there's so much effort to use the algorithms to like organize the podcasting space to try to amplify the brilliance of this otherwise very like sophisticated manipulative story, and in order to feedback loop back into society to want to have the effect where people will then, who didn't see it, will then say, well, everybody else apparently has seen it, I guess I should too. I guess everybody's been influenced by it this way, and they've had these collective dreams that I'm reading about. Don't they only want people to have this idea that you're either one of the non-mutant, non-beautiful people, plebes, can't do anything to influence your reality in the Spider-Man Marvel Comics universe or DC Comics universe, or you could be one of the favorite selected, beautiful people, one of the mutants, one of the alien chosen people, right, like Superman was, who can have this your own egotistical universe that's built up, that you're the star in your own show. You've created your own reality.
As we mentioned, this is Dante's comedy, right? Like Dante's comedy is kind of a universal model, if you will. Like you're gonna have to go through the inferno before you get to paradise. It's just, sorry, welcome to the world. Like we don't live in a perfect world. So you're gonna have to look at your friends that are kind of just like, face down in the mud, and the other ones that are just like gurgling up like black sludge, and you're like, Jesus, what'd you eat? Beethoven, somebody said, like, he was asked, like, what's the point of art? What's the purpose of art? And someone said, well, it's to elevate the soul, and da-da-da. And Beethoven said, nonsense. If I compose a march, you want to march. If I compose a waltz, you want to waltz. If I compose a mass, you want to pray. Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Exiting the Cave. I'm here with a new guest, Matthew Ehret, my good friend. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you for having me on, Dave.
Yeah, we've been working on films together, so we've been collaborating quite a bit of late. And just before this interview, I forgot that we were supposed to record at 7. I was watching you on a podcast and eating chicken, and then it just hit me that we were supposed to be having this conversation. So thank you for, despite my lateness.
Well, it's good. It's pretty good excuse, man. And it feels like, I guess in your mind, the conversation is kind of just flowing from what you've already heard me saying minutes ago before we began. So that's kind of cool. It's kind of like another chapter. And, we always have good conversation, and your mind is always tackling the big questions that so few people even can go to, that big metaphysical space with a good understanding of history and poetry. So I love chatting with you, and wherever you want to take this conversation, let's just go with the flow.
Well, we're trying to exit the cave. So
right.
Yeah, I guess we have no choice but to go up into hyperspace at some point in this conversation. That's probably where we're going to end up, to have, a aerial view of everything. I thought we would name this episode the Backrooms of Predictive Programming. Since it's a very popular movie right now, there's quite a few interesting films out these days. And that's a subject that we've been pretty passionate about of late. You guys have been putting out, you and your wife, Cynthia, all sorts of great films, right? What's your latest film, by the way? It's
Black Sun Rising.
Yeah, the Black Sun Rising. So all about the esoteric roots of fascism, really, right? Which has kind of been made into like a new cool contrarian thing these days that resonates with a lot of the disenchanted young folks. And at the heart of all these things is really the question of the image wars, right? What images are being propagated in society and sort of creating an emotional connection with audiences. I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of what film is, but in a sense, that's kind of what poetry is. And what Plato was talking about when he was talking about the image makers, right? The people who were creating these shadows that were projected onto the cave walls, which people believe to be the absolute reality. So yeah, how do we get out of that, right? If assuming that those shadows aren't reality and there's something else, how would we know? How do we start to poke around in the dark and try to get some higher ground and maybe finally find some space to crawl out of? We might have to start by crawling, right, before we can actually inhabit that higher realm of sun and whatever is there. So I guess first question, you've been talking about disclosure. There's just a new movie, Disclosure, warning about. I mean, it's about a kind of alien invasion of some sort. You were just talking as well. I was listening to your talk, your very fun talk, Peter Thiel's Secret Doctrine, where again was Peter Thiel. He's warning about the Antichrist. He's going around giving lectures at the Vatican or whatnot. I think it was canceled, but he's been giving lectures warning about, this is something he's concerned about. And yet he seems to be building the very thing that he's warning about,
Yeah.
which is strange.
Yeah.
And it just also makes me think of Brave New World, same kind of idea, right? Where Aldous Huxley is warning, or we've been told that Aldous is warning about some, coming dictatorship or whatnot. And yet he was, very intimately involved in building out a lot of the infrastructure and programs for this Brave New World, right? From MK Ultra and whatnot. So it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
right. They're kind of, it's almost
Yeah.
as if the dark overlords, as James Delingpole calls them. I like it. I'm using that term now. Uh, as if they're telling you, right? Like, why would they tell you, right? Why would the bad guys tell you what they want to do? I think that
Yeah.
that's something kind of
Well,
weird.
yeah, I think they really do. They do it partially, but they can only wrap it in fiction. Like when it does happen, it's typically not always, but oftentimes it will be wrapped in the veneer of fiction, and so the effect of it is that it's just fiction. It's like when Aleister Crowley in his Book of the Law talks about the different. He provides advice on how do you select the best quality of human sacrifice for your demonology, whatever, to
Right.
extract the best behavior from whatever demons that you're trying to invoke and get to obey you. These supposed archonic elemental, primal forces that is supposed to exist will only respond to you if you give sacrifice, and they only like, certain types of sacrifice. So he lays it all out there in disgusting, gory detail. But then when he's held accountable for it, his response was always to say, "It's just a joke. I'm just being. It's a fictional tale. I'm not serious." And his followers do the same thing, and the same thing for Aldous Huxley. When he lays out his what he portrays in his Brave New World as being the inevitable destiny of humankind in the not too distant future into this dystopic hellscape of you. Well, you could say it's almost utopian, but I
Mhm.
would say dystopian because no, everyone's like a machine. Everyone's forbidden to use their minds properly. They're generated by test tubes with no human sentiments of love that are permitted. Like the
Right.
familial bonds are not even permitted to exist in that type of cold, you know, cold society of alphas, betas, gammas,
Yeah.
genetically engineered to have specific functions and just be on drugs. So some people say, "Oh, that would be heaven on earth because you get all of the sensual gratification, you get to feel happy, all of the same brain synaptic activity that
Right.
you would normally display when you would be in a happy state. You're still
Right.
being invoked, though with the help of soma and drugs and sex.
Right.
But that's not real happiness. So I'd say it's dystopic. But he would then say, when he's held accountable for being a participant in actually bringing the society we really in the non-fictional world live in into that type of uh, orientation, he would just say, and his followers and defenders again say stupidly so, that it's just fiction. It's a
We're just
caution.
joshing. We're just joshing.
Josh and playing around. Yeah, it's a cautionary tale. But it's like, no, it's not really. It's not, because if you look at other data points that are available to you, like what he said in Brave New World Revisited, like 18 years later, he's saying how happy he is that society is actually coming more and more quickly into that Brave New World that he so-called warned about. He's happy that it's happening, and saying how great LSD and psilocybin and marijuana are coming online and serving the job of fulfilling what he called Soma, or purpose Soma to do in his fictional tale in 1933. So he's doing that. He's inspiring the actual people who are going to set into place the Esalen Institute, like Michael Murphy and Kenneth Price are going to his seminars on the human potential that are directly shaping how they're wiring this thing that's going to become such an influence in shaping the counterculture. He's working directly with the MK Ultra psychiatrists at the Harvard Psilocybin Project that's generating all of these poor kids who are experimented upon in the real world. Like Ted Kaczynski is a kid at Harvard who's part of the Psilocybin Project that Aldous Huxley is directly overseeing. And it's like you have to ignore all of that to maintain your idea that, oh, it's just fiction. So yeah, and you get it everywhere, right? You get it in Steven Spielberg in so many of his works on UFOs and demons, like he does in Poltergeist, which is a Steven Spielberg movie.
Right.
He's always weaving together the same kinds of things, and people say, "Oh, he's just warning us or preparing us to be equipped to deal with these things." But it's like, no, I think he might be actually part of the witchcraft.
Yeah, and it is counterintuitive though, right? Because like, how is that predictive programming working, right? Like, what is the effect that it has on people's psyches? It's kind of it's fairly subtle, right? Which is why I think it's actually more powerful than we think. And like you said, people often think it's just entertainment, or it's not having the kind of impact it would need to if it's going to be successful and like bring about all the things that it's that the conspiracy theorists are saying it's going to bring about. But I guess that sort of belies the real role of image making in society and how it shapes the way people, first of all, feel, and therefore consequently how they think about things, right? So you have most people get their cues, as we've said before, about what they think about a thing largely based on how they feel about it. And so some of these emotions, especially with some of the more interesting and sophisticated, say like A24 films that we've been talking about, and some of the latest horror films, they're a bit more, they're a bit, the emotions are more sophisticated and complex. It's not just like people have this very, again, cartoonish idea of like good versus evil and how it works. And I think that's largely been the effect of like Marvel and like superhero kind of Hollywood-esque stories of like good guys and bad guys. So people think that anytime you're talking about there being some kind of conspiracy or nefarious programming effect, it looks like that. But I think that's them trolling you in a sense, you could argue, right? Like classic devil horns, or we're going to eat your children. That's kind of them trolling. And then you get the whole, you get the reactionary kind of like 1980s mom, conspiracy, like panic. Oh, Motley Crue's, going to convert all our children. And it's hysteria, right? So
yeah,
they enjoy creating hysteria. And it's just like everything else where there's this kind of fake or impotent opposition that just kind of becomes silly. And trolling is something that is quite popular today, right? Like the whole goal of trolling somebody is you get them to, as the young folks say, crash out. And once somebody crashes out, they've kind of lost control of themselves and their emotions, and they lose legitimacy. And so that's also kind of finding that then you can't really have a more serious discussion like Plato was having about, well, what is the effect of the shadows cast on the wall of our reality? And even, I mean, I think I don't know how that Plato really discusses is that much, but like, who are these people crafting the shadows? Like, I don't know how much time he dedicates to that in the Republic, but it seems like that's an interesting place to start as well.
Yeah.
Because, like, do we really know that much? Like, who is Steven Spielberg? You know, who are these people that are putting out these very
Well,
sophisticated A24
you know,
films? I
yeah,
can't
yeah.
find much. I don't
I
know
don't know.
much
Yeah,
about these
there's a lot
people.
of questions I know, and I mean the official story of this particular kid who generated Backrooms, which I want to get your thoughts on because you've actually watched the whole Backrooms and you've
Yeah.
been like investigating the horror milieu much more deeply than I have over many years. So I'd be very curious to get your thoughts. But before we do that, and I don't believe it's particularly all this one 21-year-old kid's creation. I think he's a willing participant, but it seems to me that there's a degree of sophistication in what is being acted upon in the back rooms, uh, in the topography of like what set the stage for the back rooms, what psychological archetypes, what's being acted upon as far as the collective dream that we
Mm,
co-experience together when we go to a movie or we get moved in a in a film by experiencing a film or a show that really touches deeply our souls as a society, as a zeitgeist. There is a collective dreaming and there's a shamanic quality to those who can control the architecture of those stories that are brought into our souls when our logical sentinels, our critical thinking sentinels, go to sleep or are told to go away because now you're in a receptive period. You know,
right.
and that's the power of fiction, the
Right.
power of art, which is sorry, I apologize.
No, I thought you had high tech AI sort of
I
your.
do have AI. It's an AI camera,
Oh, that's very cool.
and I thought I deactivated it because it creeps me out to
I
see.
like it. No, yes.
Look at that.
Okay. I
Yeah. So it's a high power, and I think Plato certainly definitely recognized the power of fiction of the arts when he was writing his dialogues, which were in many ways genuinely cautionary tales.
right.
Um, the so the thing about Spielberg, and again, I don't know the answers to a lot of the questions of the particulars of like
Mhm.
who is it, what's the background, what's the familial background,
Yeah.
some of the particular participants who are brought in to be the scriptwriters, the directors of some of these very influential films.
Right.
I don't know. I didn't do the work on a lot of them, but I did do a bit of work on Spielberg because I've kind of carved out, I guess, unexpectedly a little bit of a niche
Right.
for myself in the ufology realm because of the work that we've done on the hidden hand behind UFOs. My
Yeah.
wife and I we produced a few of these things, and we're going to produce a few more, inshallah, of the God willing, of the UFO, the hidden hand behind UFO series.
Right.
Just trying to demonstrate that this is actually when you scratch behind the surface of what has been sold to us in the realm of fiction, in the realm of congressional testimonies, in the realm of documentaries and experts from academia talking about the reality of government UFO collusion for so many decades. It's actually a giant, I would say, and I think I prove it, multi-generational magic trick with certain Rosicrucian hermetic underpinnings behind this plan, this agenda to create a new set of religions, a new set of sacred stories
Mm,
to color our collective dream, our imagination, our idea what the
right.
future is. In the same way that H.G. Wells had done the same sort of thing in a very, very um, innovative manner over a century ago when he began sort of carving out the field of predictive programming as a branch of psychological warfare,
Mhm.
a type of warfare that acts upon the imagination of an entire people, right? Multi-generationally. It's super powerful who can control the imaginations of
Right.
what we think the future is, because that's where the future exists
Right.
in our imagination. So if you can control the idea that the future is this inevitable thing, then people's ability to actually identify the unnatural occurrences that are misshaping our unfolding destiny into a bad place they're going to be handicapped, crippled significantly, and we might even at worst find ourselves in a position where we are becoming hyper adaptive, Darwinian
Right.
like adaptive to that type of um, environment,
Right.
which might be created for us that we should never want to adapt to. So with Steven Spielberg, what I will say, having just looked at his movie, which is sort of, you could say, a bookend to his first big movie from 1978, Close Encounters
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
Third Kind, which had a huge influence on the Big Dream, and I'll just keep calling it that, the collective dream. Um, of like, what are the new gods? What are the new, superpowered telepathic gods that
Mhm.
interface through psychic fashion, remote viewing with selected chosen beings here on Earth, as Richard Dreyfuss was in that movie, where he like abandons his whole bloody family because he becomes obsessed with going to like some mountain
Right.
where the aliens are calling him to go, as well as a few other people from around the specifically United States. It's the Americans who are the chosen people, right? um, and it happens to be a military base that has been also preparing to have this first engagement with these UFOs in the Steven Spielberg film. And
Right.
Dreyfus just leaves his whole family to like fulfill his destiny of getting like anal probed on a flying saucer forever. And that's how it ends, is the happy ending. So he kind of like did that. He went back to his beginnings with this current film that's currently in theaters, Disclosure Day, which I found to be entertaining, more entertaining than I realized, because a lot of people don't like it. They called it like a boomer,
Yeah. Yeah.
like a boomer manipulative movie, which it was. It was those things,
Right.
but I found it did have an entertainment value that I appreciated, but um, it does have the remote viewing telepathic thing, MK Ultra stuff, mixed in with the new alien lords who are the replacements of our religion. All of that stuff is there, just like ET was, with ET pointing to his glowing heart and
Right.
then like his glowing finger pointing up.
Right.
That was one of the propaganda posters that
Right.
Spielberg commissioned for promoting ET the extraterrestrial.
Right.
That have a telepathic, empathic connection with this young boy who feels and suffers what
Yeah.
ET suffers as he's getting, abused by the evil humans. And humans are always kind of portrayed in this very misanthropic way. We're just bad. We don't have empathy. The gray aliens that are actually stealing our
Right.
children, as happens in the Disclosure film, and doing God knows what to them.
Right.
They're the ones with empathy, of course, but not the humans. So you have that stuff. But Spielberg, and I'll just say this and then I'll throw it back at you.
Hmm.
What I was surprised to discover, having gone through, like, I just revisited the list of films that he did, his filmography, and was surprised that his first film ever done was a 30-minute film in 1968 called Amblin. I don't know if you've heard of this. I didn't know. So Amblin is interesting. I watched it last night. It's available on YouTube. It has no words, but it's the basis for his Amblin Entertainment. So he created a whole film studio that he still runs, Amblin Productions, based on this first film, which, it's, in many ways, there's clues, if you know what to look for, that are creepy as sin.
Hmm.
Um, and the
Give
big
us the
clue.
goods.
Oh yeah, here I'll tell you. So when I watch the thing that the key, so the 30-minute thing, what it is, it's basically this typical hippie setting movie. I mean, it's 1968.
Hmm.
Amblin simply means wanderer, the wanderer, right? Um, and you have basically a young man with a guitar case walking in a desert, off trying to hitch a ride. No one's giving him a ride, so he's walking, very hot. Clearly, he ends up what the goal is to get to the ocean. I guess it's California. I'm not too sure. And along the way, there's a cute girl also hitchhiking, and they start hitchhiking together. And along the way, he's passing himself off. He's got the guitar case. Seems like he's a free spirit, just like her. She's clearly a hippie, like free
Yeah.
spirit, free
Yeah.
love kind of thing.
God bless. Yeah.
Yeah, she's getting to smoke a spliff, and
Okay.
seems, and they make out, and they make their way to the beach finally. So it's, again, no words.
Hmm.
They make it to the beach, and she's from this world, and she thinks he's from the same world, but he's always weird. There's something just off, and they're falling further apart, as you could see that they're not the same species. Their identities are actually two very different things. And by the very end, he just jumps right into the water, fully clothed. You know, the hippies are not big into clothes, so he's in the water, happy, swimming like a buffoon. And she's just on the beach, just looking at him like there's something off about you. And she finally goes into this mysterious guitar case, opens it up, and discovers there's no guitar there. There's a bottle of whiskey, there's a business suit, um, some milk and magnesia that some people say might be a little tip of the hat for the pedophiles who feed that to kids. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. I don't know.
Okay.
Um, but there's also a book that she finds there. There's one book, Arthur C. Clarke's The City in the Stars.
Huh.
And I looked into this book. So I Googled it and I got the synopsis of Arthur C. Clarke's book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very much it's the total transhumanist wet dream of Peter Thiel. It's basically it's set like 500,000 years in the future. Human beings clearly have, created a mess of things, and there's only two communes or cult, like basically two cities. Each one thinks that they're alone in the world, on the earth. One is the first one you're introduced to is a very mechanized city where people don't even have sex. There's no children. There's no families. People are just created, like in laboratories to
Okay.
be fully fledged humans.
I see. Okay.
Right? You have like this very cold, hyper advanced Brave New World type of system where it seems like utopia, but again, there's no emotions, no questions
Right.
permitted. You're all born in test tubes. And this one guy, for whatever reason, he's got like his, he's the Matrix kind of Neo guy. He's just not
Yeah.
happy. So he's just not fitting in. He wants to go outside of his boundaries and discovers that there's a tunnel system. He makes his way out of it and discovers along the way that there's another city. There's two cities on the earth. This other city that he finally finds
Mhm.
is actually this kind of like, if you imagine just the where his city was a complete embrace of technology to the disgusting, perverse extreme that it becomes,
Right.
with no sentiments, no human emotions. This other community is another community that evolved very differently by rejecting technology and just having this free love utopian world, kind of like the Aldous Huxley, the island
Yeah.
scenario, but people have lost the ability to use typical language. They can only communicate telepathically. So they all have these superpowers and it's like, but there's no technology, right? So it's kind of like what Aldous Huxley builds up archetypically with these characters of John Savage and Mustafa Mond in the Brave New World book from
Right.
1933. It's the same archetypes where John Savage represents the person who wants to maintain purity from the reality of this technological society of robot servants and even to a certain degree robot masters. And Mustafa Mond is the guy who embraced it. Now, Mustafa Mond is not a pro-technology guy like Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is both a cynic, he's a pessimist, as is Mustafa Mond, but he's also like, oh, Mustafa Mond is one of the world's controllers. There's
He's
like 12.
overseeing the machine
He's
that he
overseeing them.
says he doesn't like.
Yeah, and they both have the same agreement that these machines have an inevitable consequence of crushing human culture, human family traditions, values, morality. That's just the natural orientation, which again is very, very, they have a very demonic idea of the evolutionary demon that is technology that must by necessity destroy our values, destroy our morality, destroy our humanity. Where just they react to it differently. Where the Mustafa Mond
Mm.
says, as the technocrat, I have to adapt to it, embrace it, and be its servant in a sense.
Yeah.
And the other guy is like, I must rebel. He's like the prototype for the eco-anarchist type of, the hippie ideal of 1968. And both of them are ultimately, they share the same core assumptions. They just react differently. And this is what's in these two cities that Steven Spielberg certainly molded his mind. And above these two cities is an overlord AI being that's been sort of in the Arthur C. Clarke book from the 50s, the City in the Stars. There's an overlord AI god thing, which has been developed by humans and that has sort of begun to, or thousands of years earlier has already begun to recreate and perfect itself. So it's basically a god at this point, so far out of our own ability to influence it. But it's kind of good. But then there's a bad one that it has to go and fight in another galaxy. And so
Okay.
you've got this clash of these two AI gods that is it doesn't fully get resolved.
Huh.
So this is like all that's there in Steven Spielberg's first movie, and then you take that into consideration, something people would normally completely overlook, right? Because he's showing you that the two pathways for the baby boomers to, that are gonna like branch off into two separate species almost.
Right.
And
Mm.
how some people, so you look at that, and then you look at the movies that he picked up and that he actually did for the next 50 years of his life to the
Mm.
present, and they're movies like AI with Haley Joel Osment, this really influential movie from 2002, which
I don't think I saw that one. Okay.
yeah, it's called AI, and it's a very influential film. It's worth watching for if you haven't. And it basically makes the argument that the AI we need to extend human rights to AI. That AI is like humans. That it has a soul. These
Mhm.
machines. So you got part of that brainwashing going on. You got his work on Poltergeist, where little children are being seduced by demons in screens who
Right.
want to abduct them.
Right.
Kind of like what ends up happening in Disclosure Day, where the children are being seduced by Disney character animals that are actually the aliens that seduce them to walk out of their house into Hansel and Gretel's house, as Steven Spielberg selected the actual imagery
Really.
of some little cabin in the woods that's called Hansel and Gretel's house, that the Disney characters are taking these children into, where it's actually the place they're getting abused and experimented upon by the gray aliens, who are the good guys, of course. For anybody who knows Hansel and Gretel's house, I mean that this is directly that's a cautionary tale by the Brothers Grimm,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. Right.
We're warning actual parents to be careful in the 19th century of the actual goings on in the witch covens spread throughout the forests of Germany and Bohemia that will occasionally try to go and steal your children and do things to them that involve very ritual abuse and cannibalism,
Right.
which is part of the whole like witch coven ritual of like that Alice Crowley. I was gonna say Alice Cooper. Alistair Crowley was also calling for regarding his mandate for sacrificing children to have whatever demons serve you.
Yeah.
So Steven Spielberg has been on this for this his whole career.
Mm.
That sort of begins with that manifesto. That's an Arthur C. Clarke take from what Aldous Huxley had already done by showing these two completely opposing but actually the same aspects of the human psyche and how it expresses itself in human social organization, which explains Peter Thiel and how he could both be maybe genuinely so clearly concerned about what he thinks he's bringing on online as the worst weapon of mass destruction that's maybe the Antichrist designed to
Mhm.
destroy us, while at the same time enthusiastically doing everything in his power to actually advance it so that he could be one of the Mustafa Moans. Fascinating stuff.
Very fascinating. No, it's very fascinating. And I mean, what you said makes me think of a lot of different things, but one of them, I guess, let's say for me, I think it actually highlights. I'm always thinking about like how are other people also receiving messages and understanding things, and like what you said kind of makes me feel like a lot of artists or creative people, a lot of people listening to what you just said here, don't actually take creativity, art, and image making seriously enough, right? Because they're like you said, it's just fiction, right? These are just stories or whatnot. And people who are actually involved in creative work, maybe they're writers, maybe they're filmmakers, whatever. They might, be upset that you're saying, oh, there's all this dark stuff in this, this world of film and creativity in Hollywood and whatnot, or like you're overthinking it. You're getting too much into like some like kind of conspiracy rabbit hole. But for me, like my first reaction is that I don't think that in a sense, a lot of creativity has been dumbed down and perverted, such that, again, a lot of the most interesting films and the more sophisticated ones, A24 did one, The Witch, very like talking about the kind of bohemian style witch coven thing, but in New England. They did that very well. It was very fascinating. And they have a lot of very talented writers and creators. This seemingly independent film studio that's just churning out these very impressive films. Hereditary. That I mean, those I've watched a lot of horror movies. You know, when I was little, I always kind of so I have a good estimation of what's out there. That's probably one of the best horror movies I've ever seen.
Hmm.
Very very well done. And
Hmm.
also the other one that you told me, Eddington, that I watched. These are very sophisticated. Like whoever's
Under the
behind.
Silver Lake, Civil War.
So that creativity on a very high level is
Hmm.
allowed for the dark stuff,
Hmm.
and the stuff that's kind of initiatory and sort of, even if it's saying the witch is bad or the darkness is bad, but it's kind of just like what you've described, right? Once you get into it, where like, okay, it's bad, but like it is, right? Like evil is a thing. And so you can try and just fight it, or you can learn to kind of embrace it in some way. And maybe if you
Right.
at least do embrace it, you can find a way to manage it, right? There's also that. So you're going to have to make compromises. And well, that's where, you're kind of playing a game with the devil, if you will, and like, who do you think's going to win, right? You really want to go down that road, and that's kind of the invitation.
Hmm.
It's like, why don't like let's bargain. Let's actually, why don't you play the game? We're inviting you to come play, and if you're smart, maybe you'll make the right decisions, right? Do you think you're a smart person? You're not going to get yourself, you're not going to be you're not going to allow yourself to be manipulated, right? Like you're a smart person. Um, so there's that. And then again, so for the stuff that isn't like the kind of invitation into the darkness and initiation and the kind of Gnostic duality, where like if you want to be good, you're going to have to embrace the evil. That's kind of also the thing. You have to embrace the darkness if you want to actually partake in the light, and be virtuous. Then again, there's the other people who just, they don't, there's a lot of people who've gone through the system, right? You studied graphic design and arts, and so you have some experience as well of people who are interested in art, creativity, whether it's film, graphic design, painting, music, but something happens to them when they go through that system. And like I was saying with Matt Crawford in the last discussion, they lose the spark. They don't have the same kind of spark, and creativity that leads to real originality and
Right.
truly profound things, like you'd see back in the day in ancient Greece, right, with like the tragedies and the quality of sublime and emotions that people could access when they were watching these dramas, right? This kind of high art performance, classical performance. You don't have that today, really. The system does not produce people who can create at that level, unless it's the kind of dark stuff where I'd say there's some stuff that's genuinely impressive, and you have to
Yeah.
give them credit because it's genuinely. So yeah, it seems like the other people, though, they just don't understand the importance of art, despite being artists or despite being creatives. They don't have that identity of the role of image making in society. And so the images that dominate are, like you said, these kind of very cynical and pessimistic ideas of man. And anything that doesn't ultimately accept that kind of idea of like the evilness of the world and of man, ultimately, it's not allowed, right? And if it is, it's always going to be in a kind of caricature, Christian fundamentalist, 1980s, QAnon mom, wetting her pants over like Vince Neil, and like you know, that's not useful, right?
Hmm.
They don't have it, and it's just reactionary. Like they don't actually understand, what should be done, or like Well, there's so many problems, but maybe you
There's
have
so
some
many
thoughts
problems.
on that. Yeah, that's why we're here. That's why.
Yeah, you know, it's so useful to think about because yeah, the power, like power exists for a purpose, and that's I think one of the things that those who fall down a wayward path, they skip the step of thinking through the purpose of power before they just want the thing because of what it can do.
Mm,
Um, and
right.
you know, whether it's because why does power why is there power, why does power exist? Well, you know, philosophically in the universe there is that which is, and then there's the potential of that which can become, right? And so the power to bring into being that which is not but can become is like one of the aspects of power. It's a power to do something. But what are you going to do? Is it going to be good or is it going to be bad? Is it going to be something that is going to maybe satisfy you in the moment, but hurt you down the line? Is it going to be something that satisfies you or rewards you as part of actual or acting upon a certain power, a
Mm,
power of weaving words, a power of weaving tales, weaving stories that get effects, that get people to believe it, that get people through their
right.
beliefs to be have modified behavior, to act a certain way, right? Will those effects that will be the consequence of people's beliefs turning into action caused by your words and tales and creative productions, which is a power, will it be something that benefits you but then hurts other people that you know down the line in the future, or even that you don't know? Will it benefit your body but hurt your soul? Have
Mm,
you taken the time to even understand what makes your soul healthy or sicker,
mm,
right? Maybe somebody can
mm,
appear egotistically to be happy, but are doing it while crippling and mutilating the divine part of themselves that is the cause of their conscience, that's the cause of their dignity, that's the cause of when they were children crying when unfairness happened, or they had an empathy when they saw another kid getting beaten and they
right.
cried in empathy, you know?
Right.
Is that something which that thing that allows that to happen, maybe being hurt by the decisions you in your older years are making based
Right.
upon the choices that you're embracing to do things and to create things that are having a bad effect on your soul? Or inversely, are you um are you committed to an idea of helping to do things which at ideally serve both your personal physical interests while at the same time, most importantly, also benefiting you spiritually in all of those other divine ways that I was mentioning. And in that sense, I think that's what you have with the greatest poets that you and I have learned to adore, and the
Hmm.
greatest poets and artists, whether it's the Percy Shelleys or the Keatses or the Schillers or even Plato, who in many called considered himself a poet. And I think through reading his works,
I'd
we
say,
all would agree, if we're honest, that he actually was doing something quite poetic. Um, is that they're doing they're wielding their art in such a manner that they're acting multi-generationally, almost on all time, for as long as there will be conscious life capable of reading, accessing their thoughts and their words, even though it's often wrapped in mythologies and stories of you know I mean, kings in Spain battling with their conscience to either become revolutionary or to, become tools of the Inquisition,
right.
like Don Carlos in Schiller's piece, or whether it's
Right.
uh, princes fighting with themselves to either be great people to lead and defend their nation in a time of crisis, or give into their inner insecurities and trappings and ego and ultimately self-destruct, like in the case of Hamlet by Shakespeare. Whatever the case may be, there are archetypical universal attributes of humanity, of the core stories
Mm,
that make us better or worse. And there's something that is designed within these stories to invoke something universal within the audience for all time that will help us become more sensitive to the part of us that we should want to identify with, and that Plato in his Gorgias dialogue, you know, goes to great lengths to illustrate and make transparent, is the part that should lead in the dance between the immortal divine part of us that causes us to be sensitive and to love justice, this immaterial idea of justice that we're deeply that's woven into our essence versus the bestial part of us that wants, all of the lower things, right? The desires for sensual gratification, the ability to punish our enemies, reward our friends, to elevate ourselves in stature and status so that we can get more of those things. That bestial part obviously is not intrinsically a bad thing, but it should be domesticated to serve the higher part of us so that our sensual side is at the service and is even willing to lose out to the point of even being willing to die, as Socrates, the inspiration of Plato, was willing to even have his life be taken from him if it meant the preservation of the health of his immortal soul, as did Cicero, as did Jesus, as did so many of these, Martin Luther King Jr., right? So many of these personalities that tapped into that force. And I think you lose that with the way a lot of these, like you said, the way creative productions are permitted to have excellence in our current wayward society is that they are allowed to have excellence and depth of insight and execution to the degree that they don't do that. And like if you look at the modern Star Wars movies, right? Like Star Wars was episode 4, 5, and 6 back in the 70s and 80s, and there was a certain degree of, I think, quality to those three first stories, but there was always the space to create the 3 stories before and the 3 stories after, and a big space opera was created on the advice of Joseph Campbell, who by the way was a Jungian with a lot of ideas.
Spoiler alert! Sorry.
Right. Yeah, who was advising George Lucas on how to create new legends and new myths to shape the zeitgeist, right? So you got that aspect of it, which we could talk about, who is all obsessed with the use of art as a shamanic tool for influencing the collective dream with his truthful insights. But there's no, if you think about it, if you look at where did that story end up, after the whole production was finally finished some years ago, it ends up with like the force of darkness, which is like a supernatural force of balanced Manichaeanly with a force of light that is also this, that gives its whoever devotes themselves to either path, left hand or right hand path, powers supernatural to do remote viewing, astral project, telekinesis, levitate objects, all of the sorts of things that they were trying to do on children under the CIA's MK Ultra mind control experiments that are provably
Stargate, which we talked about in
Project Stargate, which Matthew Crawford goes in depth into, which he could speak firsthand about.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing that's woven into the stories. Now, the good guys, the sort of the guys who are on the side of light against the forces of the Sith, are represented by a guy, the hero of Luke Skywalker, who's ultimately a total baby boomer who is kind of disgusting when you see him, especially in his older years, having spent 40, 50 years on this sacred island, finally receiving this new student. He doesn't like humanity. He hasn't even read these sacred texts that he's supposed to guard. He doesn't like anybody, and then he acts in a very unbelievable way as a hero at the very end, turning into a being of light. But it's not like something that the audience really wants to be, that kind of rigid, Apollonian, duty-ridden personality type. Not that they really want to be the do what thou willst Scythian type either, frankly, but if there's a spin-off show where there's this twin, so there's a Jedi Star Wars spin-off show that I forgot the name of it. Cynthia was watching it. I watched a few episodes. It's like 8 episodes long. It's crazy.
I'm not even aware. Yeah, go on. Tell me.
Witchcraft. So it's actually like this girl. At this point, there's like the first 4 episodes of the show. You think you're with the good guys because the good guys are the Jedi, who are basically like Christian, fundy, monastic types.
Carson Mathers on planet whatever Zeta.
Yeah, Puritan types, right? Under the discipleship, these young ones, and they're kind of like, you're identifying with their personalities and going along with the flow and their heroic stories, battles against the bad guys, and everything seems perfectly clear who the good guys, bad guys are. It's very shallow, but enjoyable. And you have this older guy who's sort of their mentor, their Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of character who's overseeing them. But one of the characters is the twin who's been split off from her identical twin, who has been sort of training under the Scythian Lord evil Messiah character,
Okay.
who by midway through the season, and there's only one season, all of these good guys you've been emoting with, right, being taken along, they all get massacred in terrible ways, except for the one twin and her Obi-Wan Kenobi mentor. What's discovered along the way is that they're twins from a witch whose village was wiped out by these Jedi monastic pseudo-Christian warriors, these Puritan types who just razed the earth and killed all of the civilians of this witch village, leaving only these two children to get adopted by the Jedi, one who got separated and ended up getting trained by the Sith. And the Sith end up by the end, even though they're evil, you end up, it's so manipulative because you end up identifying more and more with the Sith as being more virtuous because they're authentic. At least they're authentic. Whereas the Jedi are more disgusting because they act virtuous, but they're so hypocritical, they're actually more disgusting. So you're happy to see the Jedi ultimately lose out. Right. And it's like something that if the question was then posed to most of the youth in the audience, where would you rather be if given the choice? They would pick the Scythian path. They would pick the witch path over the Jedi.
I mean, it also makes me think of the crusade, the first crusade, in like the Cathars, right, being sort of killed, and the Cathars are being purged by the Catholic Church. But I mean, what's leading it, right? When they're, of course, everyone knows the story of, they're in the church and they're like, we don't know who are the Christians and who are the Cathars.
Let God sort them out.
Yeah, let God just kill them all. Yeah. And so obviously, then, we don't know much about the Cathars as well, but it kind of sounds more like that kind of thing where the Jedis would be more the kind of Catholic Church official sort of thing. Then you have the kind of dark side Cathar types that are more mysterious but who were, there was an injustice leveled against, which only gives their cause more sort of power in a sense, or more legitimacy in a sense, because you can say, well, look at what officialdom and the supposed like moral authorities have done. And that puts people in a very difficult situation, right? Especially if you're stuck in a tribal mindset where you have to pick a team, which is kind of the other trap, right? Like all this stuff is always super dualistic. It's always like you got to pick a team. And man, at the most primitive level, those are the factory presets, right? That like in survival mode and evolutionary terms, and I'm not going to go all Jordan Peterson or Brett Weinstein here, but like when you're in the Wild West, or if you're in prison, or like there's many different environments where you're going to have a crew if you want to survive, because otherwise you'll get crushed. Now, doesn't mean you believe everything that your crew believes, but in this kind of Wild West settings, you're going to have a crew, right? If you want to survive. But then it's to keep people in that, right? Even when we're way past a kind of, societal organization that requires that, and that you can actually have the cultivation of higher faculties, as Julian Huxley observed, and we're going to be we're bringing this stuff into the next film for the Woodstock anniversary. Man is no longer stuck in just a mere struggle for survival, but now there's actually struggle for fulfillment, right? People are searching for meaning once their basic needs are met and whatnot. But then, so you can still use neurolinguistic programming, propaganda, or whatnot to make people think that they have to, they're still operating this system of false choices, right? In these false binaries, or as Matt Crawford in our last episode, these mini caves, right? Sure, you'll get out of one cave, but what if you're in a whole subterranean network of caves, and like, okay, you got out of one cave, but you're still in a massive subterranean system of tunnels and whatnot. Right. And if you're just going to rely on your immediate perception of the landscape, and there isn't any other kind of uh you know there, you're not thinking about like the system on a larger level and how it works. Yeah, you'll never get out, number
Yeah.
one, because there's a bunch of new false choices ready for you, if you do. So that's one level. And so yeah, predictive programming is very good for that, because again, in one of the discussions that I was having a while back, I was asked like, how does predictive programming work? And it's like, well, okay, people think they haven't been really that affected or desensitized, but it's like, okay, can you play out a future that isn't one of these dystopian sort of day after tomorrow? Either man has destroyed the planet, right, because of his, global warming or technology, or, it's some other Palantir or Brave New World Minority Report, you know, pre-crime dystopia. And if you ask somebody, well, can you imagine something else? You see that there's a total dearth of vision. Like people have no idea, like emotionally, spiritually, like how do you even feel that out? They don't even know. I think at a sort of raw emotional level, right? At just affect, like what else? How could we feel about things? Let alone think about it and like how would it work and what's necessary to transcend the current boundary conditions. That doesn't exist. Like that's not there for most people. And okay, maybe that's very stark and like that, a fairly weighty realization for people, but it's like anything else, right? Like, I mean, you're gonna kind of have to go it. As we mentioned, this is Dante's comedy, right? Like Dante's comedy is kind of a universal model, if you will. Like you're gonna have to go through the inferno before you get to paradise. It's just, sorry, welcome to the world. Like we don't live in a perfect world. So you're gonna have to look at your friends that are kind of just like, face down in the mud, and the other ones that are just like gurgling up like black sludge, and you're like, Jesus, what'd you eat? um, you don't really have a choice. But there's guides, right? Dante had a guide, Virgil, and there was Beatrice calling from paradise. Like there is a higher calling, or there is an inner voice, right? There is some whisper of something better that you can follow, and you can choose to listen to that, even if it's faint. It's still kind of there, even if there's all the other mayhem and stuff around you. And that's kind of, I'd say that's the beginning of like what is like a spiritual journey, or like a decision, is that like, okay, well, I'm going to listen to that. Like I know there's all these other things and they're much louder, but it could be interesting. Like what happens if I listen to that? And that's the beginning, right? And so that's not going away either. As much as like the Death Star and the Sith and stuff are going hog wild, right? And we're being warned about the Antichrist and everything. I mean, that other stuff isn't going anywhere either. And people do have to make a decision as to what they want to emote with, right? Like, what do they want to build a relationship with, right? Do you really just want to identify with all that other stuff, even if it's all, legion, Satan's armies are a legion, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's the good art that always outlasts that stuff, right? And that was my other thought, and I'll let you chime in, is just that what you were describing about art was very useful. And I just thought people need reminders, right? We all need reminders, right? Hamlet or Don Carlos. A lot of art isn't, we make a big deal about originality, which in the 20th century turned into like this fetishism around novelty. But like in ancient Greece, oftentimes like whether Sophocles or Aeschylus or Euripides portrayed a certain myth, they were using a lot of the same elements. They weren't trying to like turn everything upside down and make it this kind of like, postmodern surrealist sort of Shrek, like let's just squish everything together and like bring Winnie the Pooh and Cruella de Vil and like put them in a hot tub. That's not necessarily creativity, right? It's just changing certain elements and like giving it a specific treatment. You had a certain intention
Yeah.
and you wanted to play that out. And so we always need reminders, right? Like we could always be Hamlet, right? Like there's always going to be new opportunities where we can still go full Hamlet, even if we've been doing well up to a certain point. Or we could do a Don Carlos, right? Like there's often some kind of inquisition. So, will we be sort of corralled into joining, the later Inquisition? Like a lot of the, sort of like alt-right or, so-called new, like whatever, Christian right that, okay, yeah, like the sort of woke left was kind of taking away everybody's, there was this kind of tyrannical, we're imposing all these systems and values and like everything that passed blank slate. But then you hear their discourse, right? And they just they want the power to do that too, right? Just with their values. So it's like you lose the thread. You still just deciding to join the Inquisition. You just have a different Inquisition. So there's always that danger. So we always do need the kind of sublime and profound reminders that like remind us of our humanity and like that deeper goodness inside us that we can choose, right, to access. It's there. You don't have to access it. That's kind of part of the plan. You don't have, like, no one's going to force you.
No.
God allowed the snake into the garden, and from there, you've been given free will. And people get really people really get people get wacky about that question, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, so with Dante, there's a lot of mixed reviews that that I encounter with Dante. I tend to think of him as you've alluded to as being somebody who's providing us a gateway out of the cave.
Mm.
But do you how would you describe that in more detail? Like, because Dante is inviting you to go down to the depths of hell. So what is it about Dante that provides, let's say, creatives today with the ability to generate or be inspired to generate stories that can edify and bring people out of the cave properly instead of plunging them and getting them to make choices that lock them ever more deeply into the abyss, as so many of our productions and our films and our shows today tend to do?
Right. Well, I mean, it makes me think of what you were saying before about, unless it was in the other podcast that I was just watching you in before this, people skip steps,
Yeah.
right? There's a bit of a postmodern surrealist. Was it this discussion or another one? Yeah, people skip. So like, okay, they'll go to, I remember once I was in Italy and someone I was talking to said that, yeah, the Inferno was the most interesting of the three. And then I remember being in an English class years ago, and my English teacher had said she didn't get past the Inferno. Like she never read the whole comedy. And so this is actually more common, I think, than people might imagine, that like a lot of people will not finish the whole thing. And so they have a very incomplete view of things, right? And they kind of lack the rigor that is sort of encouraged, and that someone like Plato is inviting you to sort of embrace with his dialogues, where you have to see the idea through to the end, right? You have to follow the thread until the end. And if you don't, it's like there are consequences, right? When you can't play out an idea until the end, like, yeah, let's have like a society of Ubermensches, right? And like superior people who like strive for excellence and whatnot. But then there's all these other caveats and details that, a lot of intellectuals, right? Let's Nietzschean kind of intellectuals, from Jordan Peterson to all these guys, that they'll just downplay or that they'll overlook. But it's like you have to play out the whole idea. And so I think with Dante's comedy, it's arguably it's that as well. Like he was persistent, right? He had to go through purgatory as well. And the thing with purgatory is that it gets easier as you ascend, right? So there's always a hope, right? There's always he gets discouraged and he has people there, Virgil, Beatrice, he even meets some friends who, I mean, he still gets some kind of consolation from running into certain people that he knew. Um, so yeah, like there's always reminders, right? I think of almost there's MLK's great sermon. I forget which one is it, but if not, I think he's in jail or whatnot. But he's like, but you're never alone, and he's like, I got Socrates, I got Jesus,
Oh,
right?
is it the one where he's talking about how if he had the choice to live at a better time, would he like live in the time of Socrates and Plato,
I
or would he?
forget. It's either the but if not or the drum major instinct.
Okay,
And I think it's because he was talking to the jail guard, right? He had been taken to jail, and then the jail guard starts talking about his problems at like family back home and stuff. And then MLK is like, "What? You should be marching with us."
oh, that's the letters from Birmingham jail.
Okay, is that the one that is?
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
remember I just remember the speech, right, where he's like, "But you're never alone. You're never alone," and he keeps repeating that.
Right.
And because people have this kind of sick, sort of materialistic, they've embraced this kind of destructive or just superficial, like a lot of people, they'll embrace the materialism to a certain degree, even if they don't like it, such that the idea that you have a relationship with Socrates or Jesus or MLK or any people, that's just seen as kind of like, that's
Mhm.
just abstract and metaphysical, right? Like that's not substantial in how, what shapes history or how ideas have an impact on the world. And so
Yeah.
they've been sort of taught to not really think that way, and to be more practical and again adapt to the environment, which predictive programming has this neat system of feedback loops, right? This cybernetic feedback loop system that's just training you to adapt and adapt and adapt to conditions that are getting, increasingly more concerning, or just not acceptable, right? That you can just say it's not acceptable and like, no. So you're
Yeah.
just being trained to not have a relationship to ideas other than like the sanctioned ones.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's perfect. Because I think that kind of implicitly answers the question too. Like in the case of Dante, he's helping everyone develop a relationship of of like ideas with the capital I, right? Like not any old ideas, but like the ideas, the big ideas of coming to know yourself. Like Plato says, before anybody should be permitted to graduate from his academy, you have to know thyself before you can go into politics or law or whatever, is to really like come to clean up, as Jordan Peterson,
yeah,
whatever the fuck happened to
in our
Jordan Peterson long
proverbial
back.
room, we wish him
Yeah.
well. Hopefully,
Clean up your metaphysical room, right?
yeah,
And that's a good thing he did. I like that way of thinking about it, is clean up, it's got a healthy Kabbalistic way of thinking about it.
right,
Clean up your metaphysical chamber, your bed, before you try to go and change the world. And sometimes you can't wait, but you can't do it to the point that it's perfect,
sure,
because part of the cleaning up involves you trying to go outside of yourself into the objective world outside of you to help others, through caritas, love of others, sympathy.
right,
The idea of helping others helps you help yourself,
right,
right? So it's a reciprocal thing. And the more you help yourself, the more you clean up your own act, the more you also become more equipped to to lift bigger things, to take
yeah,
on bigger challenges in the external world and do greater degrees of good. And
yeah,
the more you're on that path, the more the momentum is growing, the more you're in a good place. That's like the human thing to do. And why should that ever end? Even when you're 108 years old, why should that be something that you're not
you got a lot of
continuously?
good stories at that point. That's
No, exactly. You're
as long
five.
as you're good, as long as you're good at telling stories, and you don't, then yeah,
Well, yeah, right. So the creative embers should always be getting hotter in that sense. And people are
right,
like, oh, that's too much pressure. But it's like, maybe it's a joy. Maybe that kind of like, that's a healthy tension that we should kind of like lean into, and maybe get more comfortable with that type of discomfort, which is like, seems contradictory.
yeah,
Like the unknown is uncomfortable by definition of it being unknown. It's not something you are adapted to, or but if you have confidence in yourself because you've done it before, you've kind of gotten into the habit of leaning into the unknown, letting go of your assumptions, your ego, being humble enough to always presume that there's more you can learn and not try to like take the baggage of your assumptions with you in every leg of the journey.
Yeah.
It can become like an enjoyable thing, right? It's like a but so I think with Dante, he's like awakening these feelings by giving you a vicarious experience through somebody who you can identify with. In the case of Virgil, who's going through this, it's clearly like the story is an analog for the spiritual struggles he's going through inside of himself, all the way to the point that he finally overcomes. He leaps through the fire, and he now moves into paradise that nobody likes to read because so few people have like
Right.
uh matured to the place that they could even identify with any of the things being
Right.
said in that final book. um
Mm.
right.
And even if we're just running, having a first, like, it's the first conversation we're having with someone, and like they're not sold on anything, right,
Yeah.
that we're talking about. First thing, number one, this is more interesting. Like this idea that you would actually, like as you're saying, listen to that kind of that inner voice or whatnot that we're talking about, and like it might feel uncomfortable, and it'll take you places that maybe you didn't expect, right? In terms of life, spiritually, in terms of ideas, in terms of concepts, in terms of creativity. Like, I mean, what's better for creativity than going into these places of discomfort or the unknown? That's where discoveries happen. They don't happen in like the familiar spaces, right? So, in the least, if you're even the least bit bored or unimpressed with like, however impressive the Death Star, right, and its architecture, and and the Sith, and like their legions of you know spaceships or whatnot, it's more interesting. What the thing we're describing is actually more interesting, uh, and it does pay dividends, right, fairly quickly. And we have examples, right? Like Dante's work, despite transcends so many other artists, even in his age, right? If you think like his master, Guido Cavalcanti or Guido Guincinelli, like Dante was a beginner. He was around other Italian poets who were decorated and very talented writers, but there was something spiritually and intellectually way more potent in Dante's poetry, even before the comedy. That again, this is another thing people aren't really familiar with, right? Like Dante, everybody's given the comedy, but like he's got a whole spiritual journey of poems from his early Vita Nuova, the New Life, to the all the intermediate canzoni, and like they're all different spiritual and emotional states that he's wrestling with. And so yeah, we take all that away from people, and yeah, then it's not surprising, right? We can't necessarily blame people if they've just been fed that kind of feedback loop of like
Yeah.
Death Star, Scythian sort of duality. That's kind of the other thing, right? Like if we're being honest, we can't blame people who, if you have responsibilities, you've just gone through life and, through the steps and everything that's been required of you at every step. It's not obvious, right? Like if we're going back to our Plato's allegory of the cave, there's a reason that the world was organized around the workings of those shadows. So you're definitely going to inconvenience yourself if
Yeah.
you're now going to take a route that doesn't abide by what the shadows are doing and what the reality dictated by the shadows, because everything is organized around that.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you're
yeah,
going to
yeah.
be in the liminal spaces in one way or another. So yeah, that's a challenge, right? But all the more why we probably have to familiarize ourselves with the better works of art, right? The better works of culture, literature, spirituality that will give people the kind of food and fuel
Yeah.
that they need. Hence the predicament, right? That like
Yeah.
if people don't have that, and today creativity is being allowed, but it's only for a particular kind of creation. I think that should be a reminder to the creatives, right, and the image makers of today that there is a great responsibility, right, to take this seriously, and to inspire yourself with the better traditions in Western civilization, so that you can actually tap into that, and produce something that is not
Right.
of the
Yeah. Because that's the key thing here is it's the realm of ideas is the purview of all of our like all human beings by being human. We're not equal in some Marxian way, but we're equally yearning of the transcendent. We all have an equal quality where there is something within us that yearns to go beyond that which currently is. Both in the material but also the spiritual domain, right? The psycho-spiritual domain of the known to the unknown. We yearn to feed our soul with things that allow for the 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 known to become bigger relative to the unknown, which will always be bigger, always, no matter how far we get in a billion years in the future, the unknown will still always far outnumber or outweigh the known. Well,
yeah.
we want that proportion generally. There are things that we can know that we want to increase in relative proportion, right? And that is contingent upon us feeding the thing in ourselves that allows us to lean into and go and leap outside of our comfort zone into the unknown, into to making discoveries in the arts, in the sciences, in that all transfer back into coming to know ourselves and our
Mhm.
subjective universe ever more perfectly. And the more we know ourselves, the more we also can know the universe outside of us. So there's this reciprocal dance, right? Of it's not a chicken or the egg question. Like, should you just know the universe first and then know yourself, or should you know yourself before you go out and know the universe? It's like, well, maybe it's a bit of both,
Right.
and it's a dance, but you have to place your priorities in the correct
Right.
sort of station, right? You gotta value the health of your undying soul more than the health of the material part of yourself. And if you place your values in the correct locations, and this is a big idea in Confucian philosophy, even in China, right? Is the wise man knows where to place, how to define the terms and place values where they should be in a correct ordering. So we don't value plants accidentally more than we value human babies, which
Right.
some people do because they're
Right.
confused. Um, and so this domain of ideas, which should be the place I think where good art brings people into a love of ideas that empowers them to do both of those things at the same time, um, is destroyed in a lot of the acceptable arts that are given money to be made into productions and to be amplified into the collective zeitgeist in our current day and age that's so confused.
Mhm.
Those art forms and those productions tend to be those things that take a perverse version of what you described,
Mm.
right? So they take, like, it's true, we need a great person without the without a quality of elites, without a quality of great person, a universally historic person who's risen to the challenge and has gone through the fires that a Dante has, or that a Socrates has, or Martin Luther King. History doesn't move forward. It will tend to collapse into some feudal system of superstition and stasis under some hive mind of
Right.
run by um, some high priesthood calling themselves the immortal gods of Olympus,
Right.
or Pharaoh or whatever. People fall back into the cave kind of easily, unfortunately.
That's a
We're
good
not
point.
right. We're not for these Promethean figure types who tend to emerge to to shake people out of their complacency and to bring in these beautiful high ideas. So art should accentuate that. But what you have with our modern society's movies in the West, at least, I'm not speaking for all movies, but I'm
Yeah.
speaking here for the West, and specifically the North American productions, and maybe I would extend that to Europe, is that the hero, following the sort of thesis of this degenerate asshole who's very influential, named Thomas Carlyle, who wrote this book
Oh, yeah. 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 Oh, yeah.
who wrote this book called Heroes and Hero Worship. as well as Bulwer Lytton is another one who wrote like Rienzi to try to like amplify the idea of the hero archetype, is that the hero in the stories that we're told to empathize with and be influenced by are the Spider-Mans, they're the Supermans, they're the Batmans, they're the Harry Potters,
Right.
they're the Luke Skywalkers, they're the people you will never be because they've either been subjected to something so supernatural, like a radioactive spider, or something so psychologically traumatizing. God forbid we should all go through this, like watching our parents getting brutally murdered and building a split
Is that
personality
Batman?
as Batman. Yeah. Where he becomes like a renegade, hero by night with a total split dark personality from his public daylight
Right.
Apollonian persona. So you got this like splitting character, and he's also born super wealthy too. It doesn't hurt. Most people can't identify with that. Or you're Harry Potter, and you're like, a version of the Messiah, like as is Jedi Skywalker or whatever, Luke Skywalker. You're born into special families, these almost like royal families of magic that have been passing on a certain tradition
Yeah, they're
to
like
you.
space Buddhas.
They're like space Buddhas. They're space messiahs, right? They're the people that you could. They're the gods. They're the X-Men, the freaks who are born with mutations that give them powers,
Mhm.
right? As all of the X-Men have these superpowers trained by this pseudo Jesuit professor Francis
Right.
Xavier, right? To train them how to use their psychic spyware powers in
Right.
their special secret school for gifted young people. Um, Created the same week that Esalen Institute is also created to help,
Yes.
train people to actualize their human potential, whatever Aldous Huxley meant by that. Um,
Right.
so, you the hero figure is turned into this perverse Neo from the Matrix, right? At first, we're everyone is being trained. It's the Neo character is designed to be the thing that anybody can identify with, which appears to be universal, but you soon discover that that ain't so,
Right.
right? Because
He's
Neo is the Messiah. He literally even has to die in this archonic, gnostic, hellscape real world that we actually live in as our bodies are being suckled for their energy to maintain this AI virtual reality complex that we call like the illusion of reality in this video game we're told we're living in, or we discover soon that we're living in. But he has to literally die, become a messiah, and then develop superpowers that clearly only he can do because he's the one. He is Neo, which is an anagram for the one, is uniquely capable of like bringing into being. And so you ultimately can't go with him in that empathic journey, and you can't make the world better at the end of the day. It
right.
becomes like really people are trained to they're hypnotically induced. There's traps in that movie in the first, second, and third, but especially that first movie, where like this one scummy human who at first you're like maybe he's with the good guys fighting the big bad self-conscious alien demons that want to like loosh us for our energy. You're like this one guy is making a deal with the devil, the AI devil, where it's offering him the gift of becoming a super rich guy who can have as much sex and eat as much steak
Yeah, it was just
possibly
that
want.
guy. Yeah.
That guy, right? And he's like, you know what? I know it's not real, and he's holding this beautiful piece of steak, and it smells real though, and it tastes real, so it might as well be real. And at first, you're kind of like grossed out watching this guy, but the whole storyline is designed for that to be a splinter in the mind where most people will be induced to revisit implicitly. It's a weird bit of like alchemy. That question, and by the very end of the whole experience, you're like, well, maybe I really would rather be that guy. I really would rather believe in the beautiful illusion than accept the ugly
Mm,
reality, which is
mm.
going to make my life uncomfortable. I might suffer. At least
That
this I
reminds
have.
me of a lot of people. I mean, that sounds like a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
That as nasty as it sounds, but yeah, and that just presents the complexity of the kind of questions that we're talking about, and all the more why we should yeah, we shouldn't skip steps, right, or rush, because there are alternatives as well, right? Like these kind of predicting programming models are sophisticated models that seem to model reality uh, close enough that like we should believe them, or we're going to have to work with them, right? Because they seem way more sophisticated than like the models that the everyday man has, right, available to him to figure out how to navigate the labyrinthine sort of matrix world. And that's so like, yeah, but there is an alternative, right? And how do you, at first, I guess the first step is just developing a kind of emotional relationship, right? Or again, I guess this is where the spiritual question comes in again, with something that is not that, right? Like, because you don't necessarily intellectually have either the infrastructure at first, right? Or, the ability to discern all the ins and outs of a way out of the cave, right? Even if you know that there's all these false paths. And you're kind of describing, if we're going back to our initial allegory here, the guy who would be given the chance to now be, if not one of the shadow casters, an assistant, right? You're going to work within the complex, the shadow casting complex. You're going to have a position, at a think tank. You're going to have a nice cushy think tank job, or like a tenured position in academia, or you will be a published poet. You may have abandoned a lot of your ideals, and you may have been nudged into going into a certain direction artistically, whether it's literature, whether it's film, right? I think a lot of people, they start out very talented and they have that raw kind of inspiration that could become many things. That's the other thing, right? Like the talent, we talked about this in the last episode with Crawford. Talent and smarts isn't necessarily enough. In fact, it might make it easier for you to be seduced, because you're more of a target for recruitment into the kind of Sith infrastructure, if you will, right? So it might actually be easier for you. Life could actually be a lot easier for you because you're good at making shadows already. You're already a good craftsman. So that presents a whole set of other paradoxes. And it feels like, yeah, this will be another discussion because it could go on for a while, but that's a thing too, right? Like the cave. And there are a lot of subtleties to this question. And again, I mean, a moment here to appreciate. That's why Plato truly was a poet. Like, I think of all, Plato was taking the poets to task, and he's saying, yeah, I mean, Homer has, great respect for Homer, the prince of poets. And, he loves poetry, right? He called Sappho the 10th muse, which is probably the best sort of compliment that you could get as a poet. Um, but he was like, but there's still an issue, right? Like, what if they're creating imitations because they're creating images which are not the direct reality of things or absolute reflection of reality, and to the degree that these images are maybe misleading, incomplete, incorrect, faulty, whatever the issue, that has effects on society. And yet, so he comes up with this allegory of the cave, which arguably is one of the most enduring of all images, right? And more powerful, right? It's maybe not as riveting as some of the battle scenes in Homer, or the erotic poetry of Ibycus and Sappho. Like, these guys were really good. I mean, another thought here, I think of like, were the early Christians or the people managing all the manuscripts, did they look at this stuff and they're like, well, it's very, very good, but like, if all of the Greek canons of poetry are just sort of migrated, it wouldn't work with, if you're trying to create a new kind of moral, spiritual, and civilizational matrix. Because yeah, the Greeks did have a lot of this very, as far as the poetry goes, is a lot of very sensual and kind of like, the best poets were the erotic poets, the most celebrated, but they did it very well. The fragments that I've seen of Ibycus, like, it's not like offensive. You're just like, wow, these guys were, they're just really good. Sappho, amazing. You read that stuff and you're sad that we only have fragments.
What
But
is it that makes? Because I haven't read a lot of the erotic poetry of Greece, and I've Sappho I've read almost nil, except a few things you've published in
yeah,
translated form in your New Lyre magazine. Um, how, like, what is the difference
yeah. Again,
between?
it's not like Pornhub, right? It's not like that when we say
Yeah,
it's like it's. But just to say that
like what is it? Yeah,
Plato's,
like how does it express itself? How is it different from
I'll read
something that is
one.
degenerate?
That is,
Okay, yeah, read one.
I
Okay,
could
cool.
read a
Yeah.
fun one, but just to say that Plato saw this, right? And he was like, we're not going to get out of this problem if poets don't hold themselves to a higher standard in terms of trying in their image making to capture the highest of virtues
Well,
and
you
truth.
you got it with the IO, right? The IO dialogue or ion dialogue.
Ion, yeah. I've been meaning to record that one. Yeah.
It's a great one. I love that one so much because it's so ironic. It's hilarious. And you got this guy who's so famous as a reciter of Homer,
Right.
who's so full of himself. And yet there's something really true about the quality of the creative process that the guy is tapping into because he genuinely loves Homer, though he has no understanding of what Homer is actually doing.
Right.
And
Right.
so he's understandably the most famous performer of the time that Socrates is interfacing with and trying to get, well, what's your motive? Why are you doing this? What do you understand when you're, and it's like, and he literally can recite Homer backwards and forwards and inside
Right.
and out, and he becomes possessed literally by what he believes is the spirit of Homer, though he
Yeah.
doesn't understand what Homer is doing. So how could he be? And it's hilarious
Right.
because then Socrates asks him to like try somebody else out. Can you recite like Aeschylus or Sophocles or something like that? And he's like, no, I can't do that because it's true. He doesn't care. He only cares about the thing that's winning him his fame and money is Homer, and that's where his passion is.
Mm.
And Socrates, he's sort of seeing Socrates as this annoying, increasingly like analytical, dialectic creature who's kind of like a mosquito who's kind of like beginning to pester him because he's asking him questions and he doesn't like being
Right.
asked questions. He's a
Right.
performer. He's a peacock.
He's an
And
actor.
so
I mean, it's the
he's
good
an
analogy.
actor, right? He's
Modern
wearing on his mask,
Hollywood.
but there's nothing there. And
Yeah.
then he finally like asks, he's pushing Socrates to, demonstrate that he's a creative. You wouldn't understand me, but then Socrates goes off and just like pumps out his own off the cuff recitations and then improvs of this great poetry, right? Demonstrating in the process of the dialogue that he's actually a better poet. And he's somebody who actually has cared about the mind and intention of Homer more than this other guy has who loves Homer so much. And it's hilarious. But he's really getting across that you should only like the artist should go through the process, the fire of taking responsibility for getting to know and internalize the intention and the mind and the identity of the creator whose productions you have been induced to love. Because there's a certain type of spell. It's a
Yeah.
powerful magic.
Yeah.
It's a great it's alchemical.
Yeah.
But it's like if you're gonna use this magic in a good way, you got to be honest enough to go and get to know the person whose works you're and you see that with these manipulators is that they will often like the effect of what a Bach a Bach method of composition will get, and they will go through the hoops of learning the technique. Some of them will even be able to improvise, and I've seen directly, and I've spoken to, and I've heard the productions of a few very quality, creative
Hmm.
producers in our modern age who can do Bach like and Mozart like productions
Right.
musically, but they have no understanding. They didn't care enough about the truth of what was animating the hearts and minds of these personalities to be able to properly do it in
Right.
such a manner that it could be really authentic or it could be really advanced upon, which is, I think, what Bach and Mozart and Beethoven all wanted is for people to both internalize, but then to make better, to expand upon, like a scientist wants future scientists to take their work and make it better, to build on it, even if it means overthrowing some of the unknown assumptions that current scientist has. That's a good scientist and
Right.
that's a good artist. And these guys can't do it. In that sense, it's kind of like AI, where an AI can at best extract patterns from what creative humans do and syncretically put them together to get effects that seem similar, but they're lacking of the originating driving eureka of that core, you know, creative spark that made Bach possible.
It's
And
something else. That's what they don't
something
get,
else.
because they've mastered the rules and the techniques and all the things that are technically measurable or quantifiable in one way or another. But the metaphysical and the spiritual and sort of non-linear immaterial character aspects of the art, again, we're, again, especially in our society, and this started with really the Enlightenment, like that's what really, that's not a thing. Like you're not able or not allowed, depending on who you ask, to study these more kind of abstract or metaphysical areas, because they're apparently not consequential, right? They don't actually have any bearing on the material world. Bach's spirituality and his morality had no impact, apparently, right? If you're an Enlightenment or, positivist sort of thinker, on his ability to compose, right? You could argue that he was technically savvy and erudite and all that, but yeah, no, like his spiritual and moral and like the subjective process within, like that's not something that you can objectively reference or talk about, other than maybe in like a Kantian transcendentalist kind of way, right? Where it's kind of esoteric. Someone wrote to me, because I had, obviously this is a conversation that comes up with some contributors. Dear David, we're just talking about the problem, people who go through the academy, recurring theme these days. Dear David, the trouble with the academy is that its alumni spend all their time analyzing things, and then, to test their analysis, synthesizing things on the basis of that analysis, which means that they only end up with what is synthetic. And with that sort of clever, supercilious arrogance, where we mere mortals are led to believe that they are the only ones who really know what it's all about. But you see, they don't. For a start, genuine creation precludes arrogance. Usually it requires a great deal of humility. Genuine creation comes from inside, whereas what they do is imposed from the outside. It's all about appearance rather than reality. Their progress is from the outside in, whereas that of the genuine artist is from the inside out. So everything these fellows do is fake, simulacra of the real deal. He goes on and on. I thought that was an apt kind of, that's people go, if you go through the system where you're kind of trained and groomed to do that over and over, to analyze, pick things apart, it becomes a reflex, right? That's how you start to think when you're encountered with a certain thing. You have all these reflexes, and right, because I had just said, I always hold out with the faith that people who have gone through that kind of thing can still break out of it, right? And I think we've all had that experience, whereas like you've met somebody who's very kind of, they've been immersed into a certain kind of culture, and like, are they able to transcend that, right? Even not necessarily leaving it all behind, right? You can use a lot of what you've used, but that spark, getting back in touch with that spark, and that's kind of what's going to decide, right? If the creatives of today can master their skills, right, and their technique.
It's difficult, right? Because it's like part of what makes the universal classical, like the highest quality of classical like capital C, what makes it viable and makes it eternal and not something so easily washed away by the sands of time as so much of the lesser art is, that we've forgotten about and that has been lost. But what makes, whether it's in the music or in the literature and the poetry or cinematic even domain, classical, is that it brings in something which is, it awakens within us something which is eternal. It's not simply trying to entertain us. It's not simply trying to manipulate us or influence us or give us like an effect, but it's something which awakens sentiments that Schiller would call the universal sentiments, or Plato would give it probably a very similar name, right? The sentiments that are almost like universal instincts, kind of like we have the power of sight and of hearing, of taste and of smell.
Right.
And you can think about the nature of those things, though you can't see sight, you can't hear hearing, right, as a power, as the idea of it. You could see it, you can understand these things by thinking about what they do, the attributes that they have, and you could kind of triangulate mentally as thought objects or gestalts upon them as ideas and thus understand them at an ever more greater degree. But you can never, with those senses, access those things. But similarly, we have the sense of justice, the sense of beauty, the sense of like harmony, or the lack of those things, right? The
Right.
dissonances and disequilibriums that result in us not being able to detect an authentic an authentic set of words that are being composed in such a manner that our ears hear them
Right.
and that our minds interpret what our ears hear and then recognize an honest intention or not, such that we can't discern the difference between the speech patterns of a, let's say,
Right.
Barack Obama versus a Martin Luther King Jr., right?
Right.
That might use
Right.
similar forms of rhetoric, similar tools of speech, but
Flourishes and yeah,
yeah,
sequences similar.
but there's something lacking in one which is present in the other. And if we ourselves don't have that thing which is present in the heart of a Martin Luther King, we are going to not be able to discern what is why what is lacking in the Obama speech in the
Right.
Obama, right? There's something absent. So it's
Right.
these higher subtleties that great art will awaken again, and whether it's through poetry or whether it's through literature or whatever, or painting even can do it. And part of the problem is that it relies upon a degree of ambiguity, right? You can't force feed the audience
Right.
the answer that you want them to have.
Right.
You got to create a space, which I think this is the challenge, is that it requires a faith in an optimistic faith that within humankind who will be observing and experiencing the art that you're creating, there is something that will be awakenable that is maybe dormant, but you have to have that faith that it is there to discover what you're implicitly creating as a controlled set of ambiguities
Right.
that you hope they will have the ability to resolve as paradox. And I was thinking about like a lot of people who don't like Plato is that they don't like Plato because they feel when they read him that they're being manipulated, and they experience, and truthfully so,
Interesting.
bad Platonists who use the art of like who use the outward formula or the
Right.
form, the shell of what Plato does in his dialogues. They will use it to get their students, and you see this in some abusive professors, to be induced
Right.
to, they will guide them to answers that are not necessarily true. They're answers they want the kids to
They're,
get
yeah, they're
to come
clever
to.
enough to know how to like use the math to imitate the method, but
Yeah, and they're posing guiding questions the whole time. They're not actually posing honest questions. They're not there with the student on the journey. They're
right.
they're tricking the student by giving dishonest kinds of questions that are controlled questions designed to nudge them towards the outcome they want. And so, rightfully so, they feel manipulated. But then the real Platonic method,
Right.
whether it's which is always being done by these great scientists that you and I have had the privilege of reading and studying over the years, is that they're using the Platonic method
Mhm.
because by looking for where is the universal like where is the universal expressing itself in the paradox that I can identify, which is the focus of my attention. So whether, like, let's say you're in science and you're a Mendeleev, or let's say you're a Kepler is a great example that you and I have spent some time with,
Yeah.
reading his writings. He's looking at like where does the explanatory model of what is prevalent in society and expected to be adopted by the experts who are going to have jobs in academia or whatever in my society and to be published, those models are flawed, as all human models must be flawed, which attempt to explain phenomena about the external universe that we didn't create. We're born
Right.
into, and we're trying to map it. We're trying to map it. And he was one of the few who qualified himself through his understanding of the techniques, the mathematical language that was the most advanced to his day. He was able to like get the basics as much, functional, But he, unlike others, had the heart and the love of the truth that others lacked who had the same information. And he was able to impress upon the material world, the topography of the physical world, the intellectual construct of the model, to see where does it fit and where does it not fit. And even those domains,
Yeah.
which seem approximate enough but doesn't quite fit, he was honest enough to not scrub it away or try to space fit it with his by forcing it. He was able to say, okay, that's important. These anomalies where my model breaks down when pressed onto reality
Sure.
is deserves my full attention because the discovery is on the other side of that wall.
Yeah.
And so those paradoxes that Plato's always trying to tickle us into, like, giving our focus to, those paradoxes is the gold. That's better than gold, right? Because it's not like we're not taking these anomalies and then extracting the universal out of a so-called anomaly. We're taking the anomalies and then we're looking for how does the universal express themselves through the anomaly, through its resolution, through its eureka, the harmonization, the
Yeah.
leap
And
that
well,
we have to make.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
because I mean, so basically, it's based on everything we're saying. I mean, at the end of the day, number one, in simple, nice little mnemonic here, I mean, the concern should be more with the right questions rather than the right answers. And maybe that sounds like kind of cutesy or quaint. But it's like, again, when you hear, let's say, a young student, let's say anyone who's ever tried to like teach somebody younger than themselves who has less experience, you want to bring them to a discovery or get them to figure something out on their own. You're going to get excited or happy if you see, or inspired if you see they're asking the right questions, right? That's way more promising. Or like someone who's just getting all the right answers, then again, that's like, well, how does this, he couldn't, you can't just spit out right answers. There has to be a process of an experience of epiphany and paradox, right? Paradox first, epiphany later. Yeah, I shouldn't get those mixed up. So yeah, the ambiguity, even like you were saying in art and the Platonic dialogue, the ambiguity, unlike the dishonest professor, has to be an ambiguity that you yourself have encountered, right? Like Kepler saw that ambiguity and he experienced it firsthand, and he didn't just like ignore it or pretend it didn't exist or rationalize that it was just such a small margin of error that it was irrelevant. He said, well, I don't know why it's there, right? And so when he's teaching you how he made the discovery, where he's now in the seat of a teacher, it's only because he was in the seat of being a student who ran into these same anomalies and then shares with you the same kind of experience of perplexity, right?
Yeah.
And paradox and ambiguity. And so same with the artist, right? Like if you're going to be a good artist, I mean, we're assuming that the kind of paradoxes or big questions, art is often about big questions or big ideas. They're things that you've had to wrestle with yourself, right? And you're not just a good showman or like a virtuoso or like an ion, right? You're a good imitator. You can put on a good show. And because you're very skilled, you can create a lot of novelty, right? You can generate a lot of different novel experiences, and like pyrotechnics in whatever your art form is. Beethoven had these in Mozart, like there were virtuosos that around their times that were like wowing everybody, but they would be crushed by like a Mozart or a Beethoven when there was actually a competition, because the compositions that one could actually produce, that a Beethoven could produce live, right? Like these guys could improvise live in a crazy way that will blow anyone's mind, right? To see what they could do. But it's because they had a different compositional method. It wasn't just pyrotechnics, it wasn't effects. And that goes way further, right? And people will see that it's going further when they'll see that, like the fact that you've taken the time to work through these problems and paradoxes and internalize all the different ins and outs, that will pay dividends as when you actually are put on the spot. And the other people who are the imitators, the fakers, they will get crushed, right? Same with these rhetoricians, right? And Obama gets crushed if he's like put under the microscope and like he's asked about like any of his policies, right? By somebody who has like any understanding of like the state of the economy or the state of, and we could say for current president too, right? Where this isn't some like like you just, well, things are way more expensive, you know, or think like this is not where there's way more wars. Like it's not uh so yeah, the fakers, when they're put under the microscope by anyone with competence, like it doesn't work out, which again is why the kind of Luciferian system has these legions, right, of like PR promotion and sort of hype, and in social media, right, just making things go viral so that like,
Well,
well,
that's why they have to screw around the algorithms. That's when
yeah,
they
algorithms like
create algorithms that will like amplify certain productions
yeah.
artificially that normally people would never want to organically embrace.
Mm-hmm.
But then that creates kind of like this evil feedback loop whereby because something becomes popular, kind of like this film Backrooms, which we didn't even talk about today.
Yeah,
We talked about it, but it's like that's the thing, right? You could see it, you could feel it. That there's so much effort to use the algorithms to like organize the podcasting space to try to amplify the brilliance of this otherwise very like sophisticated manipulative story, and in order to feedback loop back into society to want to have the effect where people will then who didn't see it will then say, well, everybody else apparently has seen it, I guess I should too. I guess everybody's been influenced by it this way, and they've had these collective dreams that I'm reading about on whatever, I guess, and I guess I am too. And before you know it, people begin to like almost mantra like this desired outcome into effect by obsessing over the plot, over what they've experienced in such a manner that it becomes almost like this hypnotic shamanic influence while they go to sleep, and then they wake up and they recount how I too have had a similar type of backroom-esque dreamscape horrific experience. Maybe it's not a dream. Maybe we're all tapping into and channeling something of another dimension, something of another reality together as we beat frequency our psyche into this, thing. And we don't realize how this whole thing has been orchestrated from above, as it
Right.
always has been. This type of process, right? It's a feedback loop thing. And then ideas which actually would elevate people's hearts and minds to a place of greater dignity and empowerment to recognize the injustice and love the justice enough to recognize the injustice in order to create plans and outcomes that they could work with to be able like make corrective positive plans for the future
Yeah.
become reduced. Those types of productions that are artistic or whatever are then de-amplified from the algorithms. There you don't get to access those sets of verboten ideas that are not permitted in that type of Brave New World zeitgeist complex that is supposedly the
Yeah.
inevitable outcome that we all must adapt to and expect. And either you're going to be one of the losers, the have-nots who will have to like be iced out, as Madonna said in her creepy Emmy, performance, saying most of you are not going to make it.
Oh, okay.
But her and her, you know, but she's apparently been chosen, as have a few have been chosen to be the select survivors, the new gods of the new world of the new age will be like granted status and influence in whatever kind of bunker, mansion bunker on Bezos's island or whatever kind of fucking disgusting, plans that are in motion or in Hawaii or whatever. But they only want people to have this idea that you're either one of the non-mutant, non-beautiful people, plebes who can't do anything to influence your reality in the Spider-Man Marvel Comics universe or DC Comics universe, or you could be one of the favorite selected, beautiful people, one of the mutants, one of the alien chosen people,
Right.
like Superman was, who can have this your own egotistical universe that's been built up, that you're the star in your own show. You've created your own reality.
And that's
And
where,
you're one of the people who can then make it. And all you have to do is sell your soul along the way, and then you're good.
well, that's what's like, again, people sort of, the like, what you're describing is what's satanic about the system. And
Yeah.
we've kind of come full circle here where it's like, it's easier to talk about in the sense that, yeah, it's not like some cartoonish sort of like comic book thing, but like it becomes about power. And like there's the NPCs, right? The non-player characters
Right.
that don't have access to the thing that you do, right? So everybody's not made in the image of God, right? If we want to talk about it in that kind of like satanic versus
Yeah.
what is the basic Christian idea that is kind of despised. And again, depending on who you talk about, for some people, it they're still going to lean into the angels and demons. It's a lot of just like a supernatural end times battle, and they really like, and the fire will go through his eye and the webbing of your toes, and I shall say unto you, right? And like they love that because again, as Tim Dillon said, they don't really have to do it much of anything in that kind of situation. It's kind of just they can rejoice in seeing their enemies punished and them being rewarded. So at the end of the day, it's still just reward and punishment, which is just kind of the most basic, primitive kind of reflexes. It's very infantile. But again, yeah, everyone doesn't have access to this thing we're talking about. Doesn't mean everybody has the same talents, but like even somebody who has no relationship or a musical education will be moved by Mozart. Like, sorry, they can have a kind of revelation, right? In a good.
Yo, I got a crazy story on that one because
Okay.
I agree with you. Most people, like everybody, will organically, as a child, be moved well by universal beauty as expressed through
Right.
the mind and performance, honestly, of a Mozart or a Bach. However, there's something weird that I encountered because I was part of a chorus, and we were back in 2007. I had maybe 12 people who were part of a similar chorus in the Schiller Institute, and we performed Bach's Jesu meine Freude, Jesus my joy, which is a beautiful little composition. It's a lovely
That's
little
great.
piece,
Great.
polyphonic and all. It's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous piece. People should YouTube it
And it was a
and listen to
drinking
it.
song. It was originally a drinking song. In the
Originally a drinking song,
Yeah,
yeah,
it was just a folk song, and
and then
that's
he expanded upon it, added a few writings from the letters of Paul into the mix, and made it more
and
of a dialectic.
that's kind of the definition of what we're talking about as classical art, right? Like,
Yeah,
take a simple thing, you can do a lot with it if you know how
yeah.
to compose. So yeah, go on.
Exactly. So it's an existent melody, and he like amplified it, added degrees of polyphony, added degrees of philosophy from different elements of the Bible and beyond that even, and then just created something new that was gorgeous and transformative. Anyway, we were just singing this thing in a public setting, and a bunch of kids, like five kids who were like, okay, they were partially on drugs, but they were clearly like wrecked by some really dark culture, and they started screaming like I've never seen it. It was like they were demonically possessed,
Okay.
where they were like it felt like an exorcism
Right.
in,
Well,
in
that's
a
where
weird way.
interesting.
Yeah, it's surreal.
Yes.
And I think they were really reacting to the fact that they had spent many years on drugs and death metal and things that just
Right.
pulled their soul into a very distorted place. And then when they, for the probably first time in their
Right.
lives, encountered something like that, the only thing wasn't to walk away, which you'd think, hey, this is
And more
annoying,
of-
friggin' square old people music. I'm gonna walk away. No, 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 no. They went like they started
they
screaming
became
demonic.
demons.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm like, does that mean that they enjoyed it? No, it doesn't mean they enjoyed it, but was it healing? Yeah. Yeah, it was probably healing for them on some degree. If they probably and then you think about like that type of experience that I had and how that fits into what kind of disgusting thing Stanley Kubrick was doing in the not Full Metal Jacket, Clockwork Orange, where
Right.
you have Malcolm McDowell's character who's being subjected to, he's being tortured clearly by assholes. Now he's already kind of like one of these kids in some ways. He's already a
Yeah, the
wayward,
roving, murderous kind of gang type.
yeah,
Even if those kids, God, we wish them well that they're not. But yeah,
God willing, yeah. But so he's kind of like an archetype of what that complex of kids was that I experienced. That's kind of like what he already is in that movie. And he's being rehabilitated in a really disgusting way by being subjected to torture in some ways,
right.
and music of, what is it? Is it Beethoven? I think it's Beethoven. Is being enforced onto him while he's watching. And this is a weird thing. I forget. It's been so many years since I watched this movie. But so he's being subjected to beautiful music with audibly. So his audible space is being penetrated by what you think is universal beauty of Beethoven, or maybe it's Mozart. I
No,
forget.
it's Ode to Joy.
Oh, it's a joy, right? Yeah. And then visually, his audio space is being like massacred by images of horror and genocide and murder,
Right.
which it's taking such, I guess the thing that frustrates me is it's taking such a truth of the transformative power of universal beauty in classical art and then perverting it, and such that the audience, which is always the object of great art, is really what effect is it having on your audience, which is why
Right.
I really don't trust Stanley Kubrick at all, including his associations and friendships with leading members of
Right.
the Saturnian OTO satanic cults that he
Right.
was part, whatever. But um, that people will then leave with an association, a felt thought or a felt memory of Beethoven and death and murder and genocide and rape, which
Yeah.
implies that Beethoven, the representative of the greatness of Western civilization, is actually just a masquerade for the real hypocritical reality of the evil, disgusting thing that is Western civilization, this thing that causes nuclear wars and genocides and My Lai massacres. That's the real thing
Yeah.
that
And
ultimately you should hate. You should want to be the John Savage to tear that thing down, the eco terrorist, the
Ted Kaczynski.
Ted Kaczynski type of. That should be what you really ultimately want to be, is the authentic Luciferian rebel against this hypocritical Garden of Eden fakery that is this Zeusian construct of Apollonian behavior modification demands, right? It's so disgustingly formulaic and manipulative, but well done at the
Yeah.
same time, such that it becomes almost like a,
Right.
a surrogate for something that is culturally classical, because it's endured. It's become a so-called
Yeah.
classic, even though it's only like 40 years old. It's not that old. Um, but it's still like, or so. All that to say, it's gross to take the perversion of truth and then present it in an alchemical way that gets transformative effects on the spirit and minds of the people who
Right.
are experiencing it. And if we only had people, if only Stanley Kubrick had gotten more love, maybe more love, more genuine
Yeah.
affection when he was a kid, less maybe ritual abuse, whatever he had to go through. I
That's
don't know,
yeah.
whatever. If maybe he could have taken that power, that creative that creative intensity, and turned it into something that would have had that same kind of effect for the positive, and then you could maybe get a better appreciation for what is Keats and Shelley and Shakespeare and Frank Capra doing, in our more recent 20th century productions like It's a Wonderful Life and State of the Union with Spencer Tracy,
Right.
and what
Yeah. But,
is John Frankenheimer doing with 7 Days in May and The Manchurian Candidate
right. That
and
was good.
all of these great movies that are really invoking, maybe to a lesser degree, but still invoking that universal sense of love of justice in
Yeah.
everybody, which is maybe a whole show into itself that we could have on Hollywood and the battles of
Yeah.
Hollywood.
Oliver Stone's JFK, interesting, right? And you
Yeah.
can even go a lot further with everything we know now.
Yeah.
But no, that I think that does bring it back to what you said. And again, we could go on for a while, so we will find an efficient place to stop. But I mean, this is why we're having these conversations, and it's great that we're. I think we need these conversations now, and especially to address the artists, the thinkers, the philosophers, the scientists. Like we all need reminders. I mean, that's the point of great art, and especially now, even if we have a relationship with all these things that we've talked about, the classics and the Western canon, doesn't mean we don't need reminders or to reacquaint ourselves with that thing today. But you talked about this question of like the importance of power and the role of power. And the example that you used of Clockwork Orange is clinically very useful in that, yeah, because once there is that kind of, alchemical mixing or forging of these, combining of these, I mean, the art of combination that's technically what gets into magic. So combining these things, it's hard to separate them after.
They
right?
do it with Hannibal Lecter too, right? Like Hannibal Lecter, same thing. The guy's a ritual, terrible serial killer
Right.
psychopath who loves Bach, who can
Right.
only kill with Bach.
Hannibal 2 is a fascinating movie. But yeah, so that. But yeah, so it's hard to separate them after.
Yeah.
And so Beethoven once said, and he's very simple, because somebody said, "Oh, what's the point of art?" For anybody who's maybe somebody who's, maybe we've induced your gag reflex, right? Depending, because we've said certain things where like we're not, you think we're calling for like Parson Mathers to like run the art departments and like go back to some pure, like that's not what we're saying. But Beethoven, somebody said like he was asked like, what's the point of art? What's the purpose of art? And someone said, well, it's to elevate the soul and da-da-da. And Beethoven said, nonsense. If I compose a march, you want a march. If I compose a waltz, you want a waltz. If I compose a mass, you want to pray, right? And so music especially is arguably the one that has the most transformative effect in terms of putting you in an altered state that makes you yearn for certain things, right? Like depending on what state it's putting you in, you're going to yearn for that thing that's associated with that state. And so that's the power. So in a sense, it's kind of simple at that level, right? If you're an image maker of any kind, whatever, your specialty, you do have that power.
Yeah.
If you're good at it. And so what are you going to do with that power? And obviously there's that whole subjective, a lot of what's going to come out is whatever is with inside you, your education, what's in your heart, that's going to be translated into your art, often maybe without you fully knowing, right? I think a lot of artists don't necessarily fully understand, right? Like there is that higher philosophical dimension that Plato was talking about, that not every artist is necessarily a philosopher, though I would argue that the greatest poets are also the greatest philosophers, and the greatest philosophers are also the greatest poets. Shout out Plato and Socrates, yeah, and Jesus, right? But yeah, so there are levels to this, and that's humbling, right? Because this isn't something that we can exhaust. But it's way more interesting once we sort of depart from the usual sort of cave ramblings and cants about what art is and culture and how all these things work, and just kind of lift the veil a bit and see what's going on, and visit some other caves, see what people are saying there, compare notes, and slowly but surely we'll compare notes, we'll build a new map and get a better idea of what's out there. And
I would say I'm going to advocate that you rename your show Kerplunking for Freedom.
Kerplunking for Freedom. Why?
No, don't do that. Please don't do that.
No, that's Matthew.
But yeah,
it's been great. No, it's because I feel like we could go on for a while. So
yeah.
That we covered a lot. So Matt, thanks for chatting. I'll probably chat with you in the next few hours anyways by text. So yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll be back again next week.